Okay, so you've received the spoiler warning. Do not, under any circumstance, watch this video in advance of a first watch of the new Avengers movie, Infinity War. This is purely to offer an explanation for that controversial ending and the likely endgame Doctor Strange refers to. Personally, I think one tiny detail would have improved upon the idea that the ending was a cheat, and that would have been to remove the Thanos will return statement. It would have been more shocking if we had the possibility, even temporarily in our dazed state, that this was the last time we have seen Thanos. Thankfully, based on the narrative history of Marvel Comics, we will not be witnessing, in the sequel, the egregious cheat of a temporal rewind akin to that performed by Thanos to reverse Vision's demise. It has been suggested Doc Strange did in fact use the time stone loop he used previously on Dormammu, but in many of the 14 million alternate timelines and not this one. Simply by taking Doc's statement on there being only one possible route to victory, we know that that is not one of the time loop alternatives. No, Doc Strange will not be playing any part in that form of reviled twist ending, or what would be the equivalent to a sequel twist end beginning. Doctor Strange knew every single destroyed soul would be contained within the soul gem, in what is called the soul world. In the comics, this gem was originally called the Soul Jewel. It was renamed as the Soul Gem in Strange Tales 178. The history of the Soul Gem gives us two narrative alternatives for Avengers 4 that would not be very satisfying, which themselves suggest a middle third way. The two alternatives, I think, should be excluded on narrative grounds are first, the cheat of Doc Strange releasing them from the Soul World before a standard inciting incident in the first few minutes of the film. True, Avengers 3 went straight, in media res, to the death of multiple Asgardians and Hulk's transit to Earth. Avengers 4 could similarly do a decent job of befuddling the viewer momentarily with some sort of WTF immediate battle scene within the Soul World, but a rapid reversal of their destruction would really negate the power of the earlier installment. There has been much talk of the collapse of the second act in huge tempo movies like this. Therefore, option 2, which I would rule out on narrative grounds, is an entire first act struggling to get out of the Soul Gem reality, followed by a very short second act, and then a final act between Thanos and the other characters. The reason I give for this is that viewers wouldn't have much stomach for lengthy action in what plays like a fantasy reality, without the narrative grounding of the so-called real world. Let us address the resulting likely scenario for Avengers 4. We will inevitably have to have the long, glum faces of the survivors, Tony Stark with even more PTSD than after Avengers 1 and the Battle of New York, etc. After all, even for the genius of Tony Stark, the physics or metaphysics of a soul world reality are beyond him, and according to his knowledge, his friends are in fact dead. This is the narrative bridge to build between central characters more orthodoxly alive and those unorthodoxly animated in a different realm, characters Marvel Studios has spent millions developing. I think the obvious option is to have a few minutes of mourning and what we could call global calamity response before some hard-hitting introduction to the reality of the Soul Gem, and nothing too impassively ethereal. The idyllic nature of Soul World, as represented in the comics, would also not be narratively satisfying. I can't see any external arc within this realm being fulfilling without some conflict with other souls within Soul World. Within the entire narrative, we would then have some alternation, as in Avengers 3, with a Thor rocket subplot, for instance, between Earth and the action to escape the Soul World. A natural mentor figure for the Soul Gem reality would have been the character introduced in the post-credits sequence of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Adam Warlock, but this seems unlikely. It is not, however, impossible. The reason that the Guardians narrative chronology does not exclude the possibility of Adam being a guide, and as a consequence acting as a classic mentor figure in the Gem reality, is what we know about Marvel canon backstory. Warlock has a history of time travel. They could therefore meet the future version of the Adam Warlock only hinted at in Guardians 2. Whatever occurs in Avengers 4, we know that Warlock in the comics was absorbed into the Soul Gem. In future issues, Warlock does in fact meet and mentor popular trapped Marvel characters and enable their escape. He can also reincarnate characters within the Soul Gem into dead bodies outside the gem reality, which provides a really morbid and therefore unlikely return for our heroes in Avengers 4, although I love the idea of them being reincarnated in a mortuary. If Marvel Studios was to adhere to comics canon, which they haven't so far in terms of Thanos' infatuation with the character Death as a key internal motivator, then he would attempt a transformation into an abstract cosmic being. In so doing, he would leave his physical body vulnerable. Our Nebula would then take the gauntlet and do a Doc Strange-like time reboot. An impossible narrative adherence to canon would be a result of the absence of the Silver Surfer. This absence means Surfer and Warlock do not return to Soul World. Yet Warlock could potentially, but not likely, still return alone and use his bond with the Soul Gem to influence the other gems. As Warlock only exists so far, in name alone, within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I am tending towards any inclusion of his character in Avengers 4 being minor and definitively not the key victor over Thanos he is in the comics. No, I predict a first act that begins in emotional tone as if all dead characters are genuinely dead. Not having this payoff to the Avengers 4 finale would be unsatisfying. Sure, more knowing viewers realise Marvel Studios wouldn't kill off characters permanently who they've invested so much time and money in, but our survivors exist in their fictive world. They must, as a result, be fully traumatised. This trauma must continue even as we cut to the Soul World and whatever budget Marvel has spent on CGI for that environment. Act 1 will alternate between these two worlds until some narrative Act 1 lock-in for both, in which both sets of characters take necessary risks to advance the plot. We will likely then see those characters reunite and take a second act breather while they discuss the endgame, which Doctor Strange fully unpacks. Well, unpacking without revealing so much information that it destroys any narrative tension. This was, after all, the problem in Infinity War. Tony, this is the only way for you to be fully traumatized. Act 2 will then progress to the final confrontation with Thanos, which will now include the newly introduced Captain Marvel. Probably.